Hi guys, Olive here. Here today to discuss Michelle McNamara's book, I'll Be Gone in the Dark, and to compare it against the 6-part HBO documentary series that premieres tonight, June 28th, 2020 at 10 p.m. HBO was kind enough to send me advanced screeners for half of the series, which I watched immediately after reading the book, so I thought in this video I would share my impressions of both the book and the series, and let you know if I think it's worth your time to tune into the series if you've already read and enjoyed the book, or vice versa, if it's worth reading the book if you've seen the series. So let's talk about the book first. I'll Be Gone in the Dark, one woman's obsessive search for the Golden State Killer, was published in February 2018. It is not only the story of the Golden State Killer, which is a name that Michelle McNamara came up with, but it's also the story of how she got caught up in investigating and hopefully helping to solve this case as an amateur detective. But she isn't the only one who developed a borderline unhealthy interest in this case. She and dozens of other DIY detectives populated message boards online, sharing information they had gathered on this perpetrator who had long eluded capture. The man now known as the Golden State Killer was responsible for hundreds of burglaries, over 50 sexual assaults, and at least a dozen murders in the state of California in both the 1970s and 1980s. He committed all of these crimes for years and was never caught, and because the crimes eventually stopped, public awareness of the crimes slowly started to dwindle away as the years went on. That low profile plus no new leads meant that this file was lingering in cold cases for a very long time. Michelle McNamara was a kind of amateur detective who took on investigating these cases out of her own personal interest in true crime that she first developed when she was a child. She ran the online blog True Crime Diary, on which she would write about a number of the cases that interested her, including the Golden State Killer. It was all the public interest in her blog posts that gave her the opportunity to write a whole magazine article for Los Angeles Magazine about the case, and then all the interest in that article gave her a book deal to write about the case even further. But unfortunately, Michelle McNamara was still in the process of writing this book. They said it was 3/4 of the way done when she unexpectedly died in April 2016. The book was finished by crime writer Billy Jensen and Michelle's fellow online sleuth and her friend Paul Haynes, and the book includes an afterword by her husband, comedian and actor Patton Oswalt. I should say right away that you can definitely feel Michelle's absence in the book, and it's not just during the small sections when the two co-authors hop in and tell you that the following section was assembled based on Michelle's notes, but also because the writing style during their parts isn't nearly as evocative as Michelle's. Michelle really excelled, for better or for worse, at making you feel like you were really in the room, whether it was her daughter's playroom where she tells you she was doing her late night internet searches trying to find the culprit, or in the room with the victim. And that is how she starts off the book. She starts off by talking about her own investigation into the case, and then she moves immediately into the processing of a 1981 murder that the killer perpetrated. And this mirror imaging that she does is very intentional, and it continues throughout the book, at least throughout the portions that Michelle herself wrote. As she's taking us through the nitty-gritty details of this case, she is simultaneously admitting that she knows far too much about this case because she is obsessed with it. And that obsession is not all that dissimilar to the fixation that the killer had on committing these crimes. It is definitely something that makes the reading experience all the more chilling. Those moments of tension are eased when an editor's note pops up and lets you know you're not hearing from Michelle anymore, and then the writing style changes. Not drastically, but enough to pull you out of it. The organization is also mixed around for the sake of the narrative. As I mentioned before, we start off by hearing about one of the 1981 murders. But not only did this not start in 1981, but also he did not start with murder. It progressed up to that point. So the timeline of the case is a little bit hard to wrap your head around given this approach. That's one of many things that I've really been appreciating about the series thus far, is that it's laid out more or less chronologically. So you understand the order in which these crimes happened, which makes all the more clear the progression of these crimes. Also, ironically, ironically enough, the series is doing a much better job at giving us a feel of the investigation. Not only do you get to hear Michelle's recorded conversations with people involved with or in possession of details of the investigation, but those exact same people appear on the screen in interviews, so we get to hear what Michelle heard, but we also get to hear directly from them. You also get to hear directly from a number of the victims as well. They get to tell their own stories in their own words, which is incredibly important, especially when you start to understand how hostile of an environment they faced, not just during the attacks, but after the attacks. Some of this is discussed in the book as well. You do get to hear some situations that the victims were put in after the attacks. But in the series, you get to see footage from the 1970s about how women were expected to behave and act in order to avoid this kind of attention. We can all be told, we can know and have some sort of an understanding that those were the expectations of women during that period in history. But to see a film that very much looks like it was marketed as an educational film for women at this time to be able to avoid those types of attacks, it really drove the point home of how much these women were up against after the attacks. And just in general, the series feels so much more like the 1970s. They include a lot of footage from back then, so you really feel like you were there. Meanwhile, the book has much more of a sinister tone to it, which is definitely appropriate, but it kind of robs you of the ability to understand the time period and to also get a feel of just how peaceful and normal these communities were where these attacks happened. Also, by watching the series and seeing some of the footage they've very wisely curated to show to you, you can start to understand how he was able to get away with this for so long. Just by reading the book, I don't think you can fully visualize how perfectly these developments, these housing developments, were set up for him to be able to prowl around and study his potential victims completely unnoticed. And also, what you can fully appreciate by watching this series is how much Michelle McNamara wanted to see this guy get caught. She didn't even care if it was herself eventually doing the catching. She just wanted to see him finally behind bars. I would say that this documentary series is as much about Michelle's investigation, her process of writing the magazine article, and then eventually her process of writing the book, as it is about the crimes. We get to see a lot of family footage. We get to hear Michelle discussing her interest in the case, and we really start to get a sense of what a dark place this was pulling her into. At the end of the first half of this series, you really do feel how much pressure Michelle was under to turn in this book on top of just normal life pressures, and also how wrapped up in this case she was becoming in a very unhealthy way, and the way that that was leaking out into her life. They include the information that she was using prescription drugs to help her sleep since she suffered from insomnia, but then they also say that she was using other prescription drugs to help her during the day, to help her be more productive since she needed to get this book done, which very much leads me to believe that they are going to discuss her death in detail in the second half of the series. So ultimately, I would say that this series gives you a clearer sense not just of the crimes, but it also gives you a behind-the-scenes look into the making of the book. So if you are coming into this series as a fan of the book, I think you'll definitely be interested in that element. But if you are coming into the series from reading the book, a lot of it is going to feel familiar, because in the absence of recorded interview clips with Michelle for the series, they hired a voice actress, a good one, admittedly a good one, to read passages from the book to insert into the series. That is the only thing about the series that I have had mixed feelings about. I know they wanted to include Michelle's views on the case in her own words, and that was the most obvious way to do it, but in execution, it's a little bit awkward and repetitive, especially if you're coming from a place of having already read the book, as I had. So if you end up deciding to take on both the book and the series in whatever order you choose to do that, you're going to be hearing the same stuff over and over again, and not just in the details of the case, but in the exact language, because they are pulling sections directly from the book. I know it is blasphemous in this book world that I inhabit to not immediately proclaim that the book is better, but I've actually been enjoying the series more than I enjoyed the book. I liked the book, and I have very much enjoyed experiencing both of them, but I think the series is doing a more well-rounded job in showing you all sides of the story. Besides those readings from the book, I have been a fan of all the choices they've made for this series. First of all, the cinematography is just absolutely gorgeous. I found that it's not all that over the top. I think they're as respectful as they possibly can be, and I feel like they took the book one step further. So if you're a fan of the book, I think this series is a must-watch. I have been really enjoying it so far. I will definitely be finishing it along with everybody else in the upcoming weeks. But if you're catching this video later on and you've already finished the series and you're wondering whether or not you should go back and read the book, I would say it depends. Obviously, you will have already experienced chunks of the book by watching the series, but if you really liked those snippets and you want more of them, then reading the book is probably a good option for you. So those were my thoughts on the book and the documentary series. If you have any comments or questions about the book, about the series, or about anything in general, please feel free to put it in the comment section below. But if you'd prefer to connect with me somewhere other than YouTube, I am on a variety of different places on social media, and the links to all of my profiles will be in the description box below. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you are having a wonderful day, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.